Welcome to chapter number 4. This is about the meanings and dimensions of culture. Now, the best way to understand culture is actually travel. So, not to brag, but I've been to almost all the states in the U.S. So before I had the smartphone, I did go to the other states too. They don't show up over here. Did a road trip. um, then been to South America right here. I was gonna go to Africa, the whole thing, but COVID happened. So, and then, plenty of countries here. Most of them are not showing up because that was before my smartphone. And of course, India, then Middle East over here, and you got the Asia, Thailand, Vietnam, Korea, China, and Australia, New Zealand as well. Okay, so I mean, in this day and age, actually, it's very easy to travel. Um, you don't really need that much money to travel. You actually need more time. Um, and also, as this is just one thing I want to mention is, sometimes we say, when we retire, then we're going to travel the world. I would highly encourage you to reconsider that. When I was in Peru, there is a place called Rainbow Mountain. Check it out. It's really, really awesome. And there were some 20 something people that couldn't even, walk up the mountain. And again, they were in good shape. You have to also factor in the altitude. It's at a higher altitude, so people tend to feel tired a lot sooner or without putting in much effort. So the point is, you may put off the travel until, let's say, you're retired, but you may have the money and the time, but you physically won't be able to do those journey. So I would highly recommend whenever you get a chance to travel. And if you look at my videos, like if you subscribe, and you'll see there are my other videos where I provide tips on how you can travel around the world for cheap. All right. So anyway, let's go into the chapter. Sorry, bit of a cough because of the cold. But anyway, so it talks about various mergers and acquisition. If you look at culture, even like we are talking about international culture, even culture in the US, like, when HP bought Compaq, because of the cultural clash, there were lots of issues with the Compaq merger. So this is, we're talking about two US companies merge and they had cultural issues. So now you're going to multiply it by like 100. So 100 times more, it gets complicated when you add the international culture to it. Okay. So here are some examples. By the way, you don't have to read these if you don't want to, but these are interesting case studies. But these are not going to be in the exam or the quiz. But so I'm talking about, this right here. It's not going to be in the exam, but it's good to read this to get some idea. So this pharmaceutical companies merge, Irish and a Japanese, they merged in 2019. Sorry about that. So we don't know, how it's going, but DuPont, the US company with the Danish company, the merger, it went pretty well because DuPont actually took the time to understand the Danish culture, how things work, and they had a welcome week, they had regular pulse surveys, so they kept the communication lines open, and they were getting feedback. They did the due diligence, appreciated the host culture, and which is the Danish culture, and that helped. Daimler Chrysler, it was a disaster, but it had more to do. I mean, it had a little bit to do with culture, but there were other factors involved as well. The SAB, Miller, Ambev, it was, there were other issues going on there too. But anyway, so let's move to the chapter. And I found this definition of culture, actually, I never knew that that's how it is. is cult or worship. That's what cult, the Latin word for culture is related to. I thought that was interesting. So in a way, actually, it is pretty true. Culture, the way I see it is, it's actually the frame that we operate in, as well as we interact with the world. Um, so it's kind of a filter that we also use when we are looking at others or when others look at us. Okay. And culture is, I don't know, the font is a little small, but you got the PowerPoints and all, so you can look at that. So the culture, you learn it, it's shared through stories, experiences, passed down through generations, and there are cultural symbols, and there is a little bit of adaptation into the culture. So culture is like we are immersed in the culture. And many times we don't even know how we are operating because it's all in the back of our mind. Now, one of the thing, going back to my world trips, one of the things you may want to do is not assume things. Okay, and you don't want to go like you probably read. Let's say you're going to Korea. You read a book on Korea and you're spouting off things, and um, that is kind of childish. Never show off what you know or what you don't know. The best approach is kind of like Columbo. I don't know if you heard, so there's a task for you, watches Columbo's YouTube videos. So you go in a little like, I'm not sure, or you go in as a student and be open, be curious, and you learn about their culture. Nobody expects you to be an expert when you're going into somebody else's culture. Actually, it's very comical, and sometimes it comes across idiotic or stupid as well. Like, sometimes some people, I don't know how or why, they say a few words in Hindi and they're like, namaste, kaise ho, acha ho, some, weird things. And that, you know, at best you look childish, at worst you look stupid. So the best thing when you're dealing with different culture is just say, hey, I'm curious about your culture. I'm here to learn and grow. And this is what I've read. What do you think about it? So go in with the attitude of, it's a fun exploration. It's a fun journey rather than, I know this, I've read 10 books and now I'm an authority. Nah, that doesn't work. And even in a culture that you think people should behave a certain way, people never behave that way. You'll always find exceptions. Even in a collectivist culture, let's say, China or Russia, um, you will find there are entrepreneurs. How can a person be an entrepreneur in a collectivist culture, right? Uh, because for you to be an entrepreneur, you have to be individualistic. So anyway, so take it with a grain of salt. I mean, you're looking at it with a frame, but have the frame of being open, being curious, being interested, then you'll get a lot more from the interaction. So here is the example. What I've highlighted over here is somebody tried to, memorize names and they wanted to show off as to how much, they knew about the company, and they kept referring to people's last name. So Mr., How, or, like you see Mr. Che over here. But the person forgot that in Chinese, the way they write is last name and then the given name. In the US, it's the or given name or first name and then last name. It's reverse. So it's like somebody calling like over here. Let's say John Smith. Somebody calling Mr. John, Mr. John. That kind of looks a little weird. Mr. Smith is okay, but Mr. John a little weird. So anyway. Um, the culture, the thing about culture is use it as a fun exploration rather than like, yeah, I know this, I've read 10 books. No, just go and just enjoy the journey. So here is another example. Okay, this is also the reason why I'm not using the PowerPoint. I'm actually using, so I'm just trying to make it bigger now. The chapters, the electronic textbook. Because it provides more information. These things are not there in the PowerPoint. So here is example of handshakes as to how different the handshakes are also. And again, it's a good idea to know these things, but don't think that everybody is going to be acting that way. Many times, if they know that you're coming from the US, those people also would have read about, okay, how do people in the US like the handshake? They like a firm handshake. And you read that the people in the country don't like a firm handshake, and you're giving them a gentle, you're giving them a very soft handshake, then they might, start thinking otherwise. So it's good to read about or to know about their culture, but at the same time be open that you might they also might have read about your culture and they might be ready for it. So just use humor and say, hey, I noticed your handshake was pretty soft. Oh, do you guys do that? Or so laugh it off with the humor or be open and curious about it. Now here is what culture would help you is also to understand how people like to make decisions. So whether it's centralized, decentralized, people are focused more on safety versus risk, individual, collectivist, so on and so forth. Okay. And these are fairly straightforward. You can read this and you should be able to get a good idea on this. And this is also a good example over here as to how you can throw some people off to understand what is at the core or how do they believe or what kind of things they believe in, which is like the core here, then the society's norms and things, and how do they, the artifacts and products of the society. So this is like the model of the culture. It's fairly straightforward. So anything that is in the center usually has a lot more impact than what is outside. Okay, in an individualistic society, because it's all individual, but in a collectivist society, the collective, the group, the member of community, the community that you're a member of, that is much more important. And here there is an example of how Americans see French and how French see Americans. And a good way is, you could even laugh it off, like, hey, you guys think that I'm probably a little aggressive, so, be a little aggressive just to make fun of that stereotype. That's how you actually can build good relationships with people, like make fun of the, the stereotypes. You get the best deals when people connect with you, when people relate to you. But if you come across as a know-it-all and you've read books and now you understand the culture, you'll never understand it fully. And even if you understand it, there will always be exceptions. So it's better to make fun of yourself, your own culture, not in a mean way, but to build friendship and to build rapport. So these are some interesting ways how people see us and how we see the world as well. And then, values in culture is, what is right, what is wrong, what is good, what is bad, what's important, not important. That's what comes from values. And values are actually changing everywhere. Like in Japan, people were used to lifetime and employment. Like, they started a company and they retire, they get that golden watch, after 30, 40 years. That used to be true in the US too, not too long ago, okay? But now things are changing everywhere. Actually, the whole world is moving closer to what the US is. So whatever is mentioned in this chapter, it's good, but at the same time, it's a part of the culture. Especially the newer generation, like I was in Japan, most of the older people don't even speak English. Even the younger ones don't speak, but they at least try to do that. And, they try to be as, current with whatever is going on in the US. And most of them want to come to US. Doesn't matter, what's going on in the US. Because, they're still fascinated by this thing, what's happening in the US. All right, so values are changing as this chapter mentions. Japanese managers, the way they look at the world when the manager is in the US versus over there, that's also changing. Even though China, again, China is also an awesome country to visit. People have so many misconceptions about countries, different countries, but when you actually go there, you'll realize that, once you strip away all the extra facade, most of the people, sorry, are pretty friendly, pretty open-minded. They're not there to get you just because you're in China. Maybe the government is spying on you, and that's why you should be careful when you're using your whatever, Facebook, WhatsApp. Actually, many of these things you can't even use in China. But that's the government. Most people are fairly nice, fairly decent. So just go travel the world, and you'll become much better at understanding other people. So let's look at the next part, cultural dimensions. And sorry, got a bit of cough going. Hofstede is the guy who, Dutch researcher, he came up with, and this was in 1980s, came with 4 points or 4 original dimensions of culture. And he actually did all his research in IBM, 116,000 employees, pretty impressive. And the 4 things he came up with was power distance, as to, in simple terms, how much people respect power. Like, somebody that is an authority, are people going to follow this person, or are they going to argue? And how much of that is allowed? Like in the US, you could disagree with the CEO of a company, or your professor, or the dean, or the president of the college, because US, the power distance is not that high. But in some countries, China, Japan, you have to be careful. You cannot say, you have to watch what you're saying, and you have to pretty much follow what your boss tells you to do. And again, they've given an example of Indian executive. Yeah, that does work, but for the most part, India is also kind of becoming very much towards, or kind of like US, meaning people value freedom, and people are not going to be gullible, and they're not going to listen to somebody of authority. So it is changing. So the whole world is changing. Same thing in Japan, same thing in China too. Then uncertainty avoidance, meaning how comfortable are people with ambiguous situations. And in the culture where the uncertainty avoidance is high, there is a strong need for security, meaning they would have proper procedures and rules, and people are less likely to veer off and do their own things versus so that applies to like Germany versus countries like the US. The uncertainty avoidance is low, meaning managers are willing to take more risk. There are fewer written rules. And actually, entrepreneurial spirit is encouraged in many companies. Like Google, it gives employees the freedom to work on their own pet projects, 1 day in a week or half a day in a week too. The next part is individualism versus collectivism. So this is the tendency of people to look after themselves, their own interest, or to look after the interest of the group. And according to this book, like the higher up on the individualism scale the country is, the higher would be GDP. So here's another thing that you may want to look at. Sometimes things may appear like, okay, is that relationship true? Like the more individualistic the society is, the higher the income is. Yes and no. Yes, US is higher on that, and the income is higher. Now let's look at Japan. Japan's income is higher. But look at higher than India, even though the score, India is slightly more individualistic than Japan. So what explains this? Well, India was slave for a long time, and that's why, it's when you're a slave, whatever money you make, the master takes it. Same thing with Japan. So part of India, then it split up. South Africa had its own issues. So even though South Africa is higher on individual scale than Spain or Japan, but the GDP is a lot lower. Plus, there are lots of other factors too. Now look at Russia, China. These were communist countries for a long time. That's why their GDP is a lot lower, per capita is a lot lower. Okay. So again, whenever somebody makes a claim, try to see if there are other factors that may be playing a role as well. Then the masculinity in the culture actually refers to how much the society cares about success, money, and things. Femininity means how much it cares about others and quality of life. So it's not gender like male or female. Time orientation, whether it's long-term, short-term. So this is a cool graph, countries with short-term and long-term orientation. Indulgent versus restraint. So highly indulgent behaviors are good markets if you want to sell stuff there. But as I said, everybody is changing, and they are also like more and more people are becoming indulgent and less restrained. And then, sorry, this is another graph, pretty cool graph. And another one, power distance versus uncertainty avoidance. So take a look at these things. These are pretty interesting, and they're self-explanatory too. And then Champenier came up with some other dimensions, and he sort of made some changes to what Hofstede came up with. And so these are also interesting, and they're fairly straightforward. Universalism is you believe that whatever works in one place should work everywhere. And particularism is kind of you got to customize things. They don't work always the same way. And very similar, this is very easy, self-explanatory. I realize the video is getting a little longer, so I want to keep it short. So these things are fairly straightforward. And then Globe Project came along. There were like 170 researchers, and they looked at lots of things, and then they kind of modified what was Hofstede's measures, dimensions into these. And based on that, so this is like a sort of a picture of, so this is the value, like let's say power distance. So people in Brazil, so what is it that they want? They want a lower power distance, meaning they want to be able to communicate freely with the superiors, with the bosses. But the actual or the reality is there is still a high power distance. Okay, so that's how you look at it. The dotted line is what's actually happening, and the solid line is what is it that people want, basically. So again, some more fun stuff here. So this is we'll do a quick recap. So culture is basically how you operate in your world. How do you see the world, as well as how people see you? And the best thing to do in as far as culture is concerned is travel as much as you can. If you cannot, read about the countries, maybe watch videos, maybe watch their movies. And even if you know quite a bit, try not to show off. Try to be more open, try to be more curious, and learn about their culture. Because once you understand, you'll be able to better communicate as well as get your objective a lot easier. And also one more thing, we will actually talk about how to utilize culture in future chapters. but try not to think in terms of how to control people. So forget about that. Think in terms of how you can understand people, so how you can work together and come up with something that would be mutually beneficial. All right, so thank you for watching this video, and I'll see you in future videos. All right, bye.